The parking lot gravel crunched under my boots as I walked up to the Gatlinburg Ranger Station, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. First solo shift. No training wheels, no Skylar looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. Just me, the radio, and whatever the Smokies decided to throw at me tonight. I'd been looking forward to this for weeks, but now that it was actually happening, something felt off. Maybe it was the way Skylar had been acting lately. More tense than usual, checking and rechecking my equipment like I was heading into a war zone instead of just doing basic patrol rounds. The station door creaked when I pushed it open. Skylar was hunched over the dispatch desk, his weathered face illuminated by the green glow of the radio console. Those burn scars on his forearms looked particularly gnarly in the weird light. "You're early," he said without looking up. "Good. We need to talk." That knot in my stomach tightened. In 3 months of training, Skylar had never said we needed to talk. He'd said things like, "Pay attention," and "You're doing it wrong," and my personal favorite, "Try not to get yourself killed out there." But never this serious tone. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not official Park Service letterhead, just regular notebook paper. The kind with the blue lines. His handwriting was surprisingly neat for someone with hands that looked like they'd been through a wood chipper. 6 rules, he said, sliding the paper across the desk. Memorize them. Follow them exactly. Don't get creative. I unfolded the paper, expecting something about radio protocols or proper hiking trail maintenance. Instead, I found myself staring at what looked like a horror movie prop list. 1. Never answer radio calls after midnight. 2. Avoid any large bodies of water that weren't there yesterday. 3. Don't look directly at the moon during the 3rd week of any month. 4. Stay away from trees with carved symbols, especially the really old ones. 5. If you hear laughter in the woods, run toward the nearest road. 6. If fog rolls in suddenly, stand completely still until it passes. I read through the list twice, waiting for Skylar to crack a smile, or tell me this was some kind of hazing ritual for new rangers. He didn't. "Skylar, what is this?" "Your survival guide." He stood up from the desk, moving with that careful precision of someone whose joints had seen too much wear. 3 rangers have died in the past 2 years. All of them broke one of those rules. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through 4 years of environmental science classes, wanted to laugh. This was ridiculous. We were park rangers, not characters in some backwoods urban legend. But then I looked at Skylar's eyes. Really looked at them. The haunted expression I'd noticed during training wasn't just tiredness or the usual stress of dealing with tourists who thought bears were basically large dogs. This was something deeper, something that kept him awake at night. Rangers died because they didn't follow these instructions. I kept my voice level, professional. What kind of incidents are we talking about here? Skylar's jaw tightened. The kind that don't make it into official reports. He started gathering his things, thermos, keys, that brass compass he always carried, getting ready to leave me alone with a list that belonged in a fantasy novel and questions I apparently wasn't going to get answers to. Lance Simmons implemented this system after a particularly bad incident, he continued, not meeting my eyes. Head Ranger's orders. You follow the rules, you come home safe. Simple as that. And if I don't follow them? Now he looked at me directly, and I saw something in his expression that made my skin crawl. Fear. Real, honest fear from a man who'd probably seen more dangerous situations in 1 year than most people saw in a lifetime. Then you end up like the others. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my uniform pocket, next to the dog tags I always carried. Blake's dog tags. The ones I wasn't supposed to have according to military protocol, but nobody had the heart to take them away from me after the funeral. Trust your instincts above everything else, Skylar said, pulling on his jacket. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If something feels really wrong, it definitely is. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. For a second, I thought he might say something else. Explain the rules. Tell me what really happened to those 3 rangers. Give me some context that would make this all seem less insane. Instead, he just nodded once and walked out into the gathering darkness. I sat down at the dispatch desk and pulled out the list again. The handwriting seemed different now, more urgent. Like Skylar had been writing against time, trying to get down everything important before running out of space or courage. My analytical mind started picking the rules apart. Rule number 2 bothered me the most. Bodies of water that weren't there yesterday. Water didn't just appear overnight, not unless there was flooding or a dam break or some other natural explanation. Rule 5 was almost as weird. What kind of laughter would make an experienced ranger run? But then I thought about Blake, how he'd gone camping in these mountains 5 years ago and just vanished. No trace, no explanation. The official search had lasted 2 weeks and found nothing. His tent, his gear, even his truck, all there like he'd just stepped away for a minute and decided not to come back. Maybe these rules weren't as ridiculous as they seemed. Maybe they might even explain what happened to my brother. The radio crackled to life with a routine check-in from another station. I reached for the mic automatically, then stopped. The green digital clock on the console read 9:47 p.m. Still safe, still well before midnight. Outside, full darkness was settling over the Smokies like a thick blanket. My first solo shift was officially beginning. The radio crackled again, and I settled back in my chair, Skylar's handwritten rules burning a hole in my pocket as the mountain night closed in around the station. 2 hours of walking the same trails I'd memorized during training, and I spot something that makes me stop dead in my tracks. A pond, right there next to the Cataract Falls Trail, maybe 30 feet across, dark water reflecting the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy. The problem? I'd hiked this exact trail a dozen times with Skylar, and there had never been any water here. Just trees and undergrowth and the usual rocky terrain that made the Smokies famous. Rule number 2 floated through my mind like a warning bell. Avoid any large bodies of water that weren't there yesterday. But before I could back away, I heard movement from the other side of the water. Someone was crouched near the shoreline, fiddling with what looked like scientific equipment. A woman in field clothes, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had sensors or monitors or something spread out around her, cables snaking between metal boxes that beeped softly in the darkness. "Excuse me," I called out, clicking on my flashlight. "This is a restricted area after dark." She looked up, squinting against the beam. Early 30s, glasses, the kind of focused intensity that screamed academic researcher. "Oh, thank goodness. Are you with the Park Service?" I moved closer, staying a careful distance from the water's edge. "Ranger Blake, you shouldn't be out here without permits." "Laura Carson, University of Tennessee," she said, standing and brushing dirt off her pants. "I have all the proper documentation. Wildlife behavior study, focusing on nocturnal activity patterns near water sources." She gestured to the pond like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like it had always been there, had every right to exist in this spot where I was absolutely certain no water had been before. "How long has this pond been here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Laura consulted something on one of her devices. "According to our baseline data, approximately 8 months. We've been monitoring it since spring for amphibian breeding cycles." 8 months. That would put it right around the time I started my ranger training. Had I somehow missed it every single time I'd walked this trail? The thought made my stomach twist with doubt. Either my observational skills were worse than I'd thought, or something very weird was happening here. "I don't remember seeing this water feature in any of our trail maps," I said. "Small seasonal ponds sometimes don't make it onto official documentation," Laura replied smoothly. "Especially ones this far from the main hiking routes. But the ecosystem value is fascinating. We've documented 3 species of salamanders that weren't previously known to exist in this elevation zone. She sounded completely legitimate, professional. The kind of person who definitely knew more about pond ecosystems than a rookie ranger. But the water still looked wrong to me, too perfectly circular, too still. No ripples from wind or insects. No sounds of the frogs or nightbirds that should be living around any real body of water. "What kind of monitoring equipment are you using?" I asked, moving to get a better look at her setup. "Hydrophones for underwater acoustics, motion sensors for wildlife movement, basic water chemistry analyzers." Laura moved to block my view of the devices, subtle but definite. "Standard ecological monitoring suite." That's when the laughter started. Soft at first, drifting through the trees behind us like wind through leaves. But definitely human. Definitely wrong. The sound had a hollow quality that made the hair on my arms stand up, like it was coming from underwater or from very far away. Laura froze, her eyes going wide behind her glasses. What was that? Rule number 5. If you hear laughter in the woods, run toward the nearest road. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing her arm. "Right now." "Wait. We should investigate." Laura pulled against my grip, actually trying to move toward the sound. This could be important for my research. The laughter came again, closer this time, and I could swear it was coming from multiple directions at once. Like a whole group of people had surrounded us without making any footsteps or rustling any leaves. "No investigation," I said firmly, pulling her away from the pond. "Park safety protocols require immediate evacuation when..." "When what?" Laura's voice had an edge to it now. "When you hear perfectly normal sounds in a forest ecosystem." But she was looking at her watch again, checking the time like she was waiting for something specific. And the way she'd positioned herself between me and her equipment suggested she really didn't want me getting a closer look at whatever she was monitoring. The laughter grew louder, more distinctly human, but somehow layered, like multiple voices laughing in perfect unison, creating harmonics that shouldn't exist in nature. "Move," I said, not caring anymore if I sounded rude. Every instinct I had was screaming danger, and Skylar's rules had been very clear about trusting those instincts. This time, Laura didn't resist when I pulled her toward the main trail, but she kept looking back over her shoulder, not at the trees where the laughter was coming from, but at the pond itself, like she was disappointed to be leaving it behind. We walked quickly back toward the trailhead, the unnatural sounds fading behind us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Laura had known exactly what that laughter was, had maybe even been expecting it. "You'll need to file permits if you want to continue research in that area," I told her when we reached the parking area where a University of Tennessee vehicle was waiting. "Of course," Laura said, but she was still checking her watch, still looking frustrated about something that had nothing to do with paperwork. "I'll contact the appropriate offices tomorrow." I watched her pack her equipment into the back of her vehicle, noting how carefully she handled the devices, how she double-checked that everything was secured, not the actions of someone doing routine wildlife monitoring. "Drive safe," I called as she pulled away. But I was already planning to hike back to that spot once her taillights disappeared. Rules or no rules, I needed to see if that pond was still there. And if it wasn't, I needed to figure out what the hell was really going on in these mountains. The radio on my belt crackled with static, and I glanced at my watch. 11:58 p.m., almost midnight. Almost time for rule number 1 to kick in. I started walking back toward the station, Laura's business card heavy in my pocket and questions multiplying in my head with every step. The gravel parking lot looked the same as when I'd left it 2 hours ago, but everything felt different now. Laura's business card was a weight in my pocket next to the folded rules, and I couldn't stop thinking about that pond. How had I missed a 30-foot body of water on a trail I'd walked dozens of times? A figure detached itself from the shadows near the station entrance, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before recognizing the familiar build and baseball cap. "Noah," I called out, quickening my pace. "What are you doing here this late?" Noah Fuller pushed away from the wall where he'd been leaning, his weathered face creased with worry. I'd met him a few times during training. Local guy, fourth-generation mountain guide. The kind of person who knew these trails better than most people knew their own backyards. "Been waiting for someone to show up," he said, falling into step beside me as I headed for the station door. "Tried calling Lance all evening but kept getting voicemail." "What's wrong?" I unlocked the door and flicked on the lights, noting how Noah's shoulders relaxed slightly once we were inside the familiar space. "Missing hikers, 3 days now." Noah pulled off his cap and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Family of 4 from Atlanta. Last seen heading up toward Chimney Tops Trail Tuesday morning." I moved to the dispatch desk and pulled up the incident reports on the computer, scanning through the entries for Tuesday. Vandalism at the visitor center, a bear sighting near Elkmont, someone's car getting broken into at Cataract Falls. No missing hikers. "I don't see anything filed," I said, double-checking the database. "Are you sure it was reported?" "I tried to report it myself." Noah's voice had an edge to it. "Left messages for Lance Wednesday when the family didn't check out of their cabin. He never called me back, but I heard from other guides that he's been running search protocols anyway." The screen showed nothing. Either the report had been deleted, filed somewhere else, or never entered in the first place. Given what I'd learned about official documentation tonight, all 3 options seemed equally possible. "Lance has been acting weird lately," Noah continued, settling into the chair across from the desk. "Changing duty assignments, keeping people away from certain trail sections. Yesterday he moved 3 different groups away from the Chimney Tops area without explanation." I thought about Laura's pond that supposedly existed for 8 months without appearing on any official maps. About equipment that beeped in the darkness and laughter that came from too many directions at once. "What kind of weird?" I asked. "Nervous, jumpy, like he's expecting something bad to happen but doesn't want to tell anyone what." Noah pulled out his phone and showed me a text conversation. "Look at this." The messages were from Lance, all sent in the past week. Short, cryptic instructions about avoiding specific grid coordinates, reassigning patrol routes, updating emergency protocols. The kind of communications that suggested someone trying to manage a crisis without admitting a crisis existed. "He's been asking me to guide search teams in areas that don't match the official incident reports," Noah said. "Like he knows things are happening but can't put them in the system." The wall clock read 11:52. 8 minutes until midnight. 8 minutes until rule number 1 became relevant. "Why come to me?" I asked. "You've been working with the Park Service longer than I've been here." Noah's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "Because Lance specifically mentioned you. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got the real information about what's been going on." "What real information?" Before Noah could answer, the radio crackled to life at 11:59. The sudden sound in the quiet station made both of us jump, and I automatically reached for the microphone before catching sight of the clock. A voice came through the static as the digital display flipped to 12 and nows. Lance's voice, strained and urgent. "Station 1, this is Ranger Simmons. Need immediate welfare check on grid 47 Delta. 4 individuals, possibly in distress. Respond immediately." My hand hovered over the microphone. Rule number 1 was crystal clear. Never answer radio calls after midnight. But this was my supervisor, requesting a welfare check on what could be the missing hikers Noah had been worried about. Noah was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. The radio crackled again. "Station 1, do you copy? This is urgent. Lives at risk." I pulled my hand back from the microphone. Noah reached across the desk and grabbed it instead. "This is Noah Fuller with Station 1, he said into the mic. "I copy your traffic, Ranger Simmons." Static filled the channel for a long moment. When Lance's voice came back, it sounded different, more distant, like he was speaking from underwater. "Noah?" I've been trying to reach you all evening. What are you doing at the station?" Noah's hands were shaking as he held the microphone. I noticed sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Came looking for you when you didn't return my calls," Noah said, glancing at me. "What do you need for the welfare check?" "Grid coordinates 35.6284, 83.4419. Near the old Cherokee markers. Check for signs of the Atlanta family. Do not approach any marked trees directly. Do not enter the area if you observe unusual fog formations." I grabbed a pen and started writing down the coordinates, but something felt wrong about them. Those numbers would put us deep in restricted territory, well beyond the normal hiking trails. "Copy that," Noah said. "Should we wait for backup or—" The radio erupted in static so loud that both of us jerked away from the speakers. When it cleared, there was nothing but empty channel hiss. Noah set down the microphone with hands that were definitely trembling now. "That's not the first time that's happened," he said quietly. "Radio problems?" "Radio calls after midnight." Noah stood up and moved away from the dispatch desk like it might bite him. "Lance has been getting them for weeks. Always the same pattern, urgent requests, coordinates that lead to restricted areas, then static." I looked at the coordinates I'd written down. "These are in prohibited territory. We can't just hike out there without authorization." That's what I told Lance the first time. Noah's voice was grim. But then he showed me something. Pictures on his phone of the missing hikers. Not from Tuesday, from last month, and the month before that. Same family, same faces, but different dates. The hair on my arms stood up. That's impossible. "Yeah, I thought so too." Noah pulled out his own phone and scrolled through his photos, until I started keeping my own records. He handed me the phone. The screen showed a group photo of 4 people, 2 adults, 2 kids, standing in front of a chimney top's trail marker. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago. He swiped to the next photo. Same 4 people, same location, same poses. Timestamp from 6 weeks ago. Another swipe, 2 months ago. "How many times?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 7, that I can document. Noah took his phone back. "Maybe more. Lance has been trying to handle it quietly, but it's getting worse. The calls are coming more frequently, the coordinates are getting more specific." I thought about Skylar's rules, about the 3 dead rangers, about Laura's equipment monitoring something near water that shouldn't exist. "Noah," I said carefully, "those rules Skylar gave me. You know about them, don't you?" His expression went carefully neutral. "What rules?" "The 6 rules for staying alive out there." 6? Noah's voice cracked slightly. There used to be more than that. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "How many more?" Noah looked at the radio, then at the door, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Lance created 12 rules originally, after his partner died, but he decided 6 of them were too dangerous to follow. Said they might make people more likely to go looking for trouble instead of avoiding it. Skylar's been giving new rangers the simplified version. I was still staring at the radio when heavy footsteps crunched across the gravel outside. Through the window, I watched a Park Service SUV pull up with more force than necessary, headlights cutting harsh lines through the early morning darkness. "That'll be Lance," Noah said, but he didn't sound relieved. If anything, he looked like he was bracing for impact. The door burst open without a knock, and Lance Simmons strode in, looking like he'd been awake for days. His supervisor uniform was wrinkled, his usually neat hair disheveled, and his eyes had the hollow, desperate look of someone running on caffeine and panic. "Why the hell didn't anyone answer the radio last night?" he demanded, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Noah. "I've been trying to coordinate a rescue operation for 6 hours." I opened my mouth to explain about the rules, but Lance was already moving to the dispatch console, checking logs and frantically adjusting frequencies like he was searching for something specific. "We got your transmission," Noah said carefully. "Right at midnight." Lance froze, his hand halfway to the radio controls. "Midnight?" "Yeah, you called for a welfare check on Grid 47 Delta. Said it was urgent." The color drained from Lance's face. He looked between Noah and me like we'd just told him we'd seen a ghost. "I was in my truck on Highway 441 at midnight," Lance said slowly. 20 miles from any radio tower with that kind of range. The bottom of my stomach dropped out. Noah's hands started shaking again. "But we heard you," I said. "Clear as day. You gave us coordinates, mentioned Cherokee markers, told us to watch for fog formations." Lance sank into the nearest chair like his legs had given out. "Those were the exact coordinates I was planning to check this morning. I haven't told anyone about the Cherokee markers." Noah and I exchanged glances. The weight of what had happened was settling over the room like a suffocating blanket. "The rules," I said. "Skylar gave me rules about not answering radio calls after midnight. This is why, isn't it?" Lance looked up at me with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "You followed the rules?" "I tried to." Noah answered instead. "Smart kid." Lance rubbed his face with both hands. "Those rules exist because of what happened 5 years ago. Someone answered a midnight call just like that one. Grid coordinates that led him into restricted territory. By the time we found him," Lance's voice trailed off, but something in his expression made my blood turn to ice. "What was his name?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Blake," Lance said quietly. "Blake." The world tilted sideways. Blake. My brother, who'd been researching in these mountains when he disappeared. Blake, whose dog tags I carried in my pocket every single day. "Blake," I whispered. Lance's head snapped up, and he looked at me with sudden intensity. "You know that name." "Blake. My brother." The silence in the room was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Lance stared at me like I'd materialized out of thin air. "Your brother," he repeated. "He went missing 5 years ago. Research trip. They found his truck and his gear but never found him." The words felt mechanical, rehearsed from years of explaining to people who asked. "You knew him?" Lance's face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on something that looked like guilt and grief mixed together. "He wasn't just doing casual research," Lance said. "He'd been working with a group studying geological anomalies near the Cherokee sites. When the midnight call came through, he was the only one close enough to respond." Lance and Noah exchanged a meaningful look that was heavy with secrets. "I should have stopped him," Lance continued, "but I'd only been dealing with these supernatural incidents for a couple years, and I thought it was just a routine welfare check. Everything was reshaping itself in my head. Blake hadn't just been doing independent research. He'd been working with an official group, and somehow in 5 years of investigating my brother's disappearance, I'd never learned the full scope of what he was involved in." "Why wasn't any of this in the official reports?" I asked. "Because what happened to him wasn't supposed to exist," Lance said. "And admitting it existed would have meant shutting down half the park and destroying the careers of everyone involved." He stood up and moved to the window, staring out at the mountains like they personally offended him. "The supernatural incident started about 7 years ago. A group of researchers had gotten permission to study geological anomalies near some of the older Cherokee sites, led by a woman named Laura Carson." My stomach clenched. "I met her last night." Lance spun around. "You what?" "She was doing some kind of monitoring near Cataract Falls, had equipment set up around a pond that I swear wasn't there before." "Describe the equipment." I thought back to the previous night, trying to remember details. Metal boxes with cables, lots of beeping. She said it was for wildlife monitoring, but when that laughter started, she acted like she'd been expecting it. Lance and Noah exchanged another look that was heavy with meaning. "The missing research team I told you about," Noah said slowly. "Laura's people. They're not really missing, are they?" Lance shook his head. "Laura's research team. 4 people, all with PhDs in physics or geology. They've been conducting unauthorized experiments near the ancient burial sites for years." "What kind of experiments?" I asked. "The kind that make people disappear," Lance said grimly. "The kind that create temporal distortions around marked trees. The kind that generate fog that moves against the wind and laughter that comes from empty air. The rules started making sense in a horrible way. Don't answer radio calls after midnight because they might not be coming from the right time. Avoid water that appears overnight because it might be a side effect of reality getting twisted. Stay away from marked trees because that's where the experiments are happening. Blake was investigating their research site when he responded to that midnight call," Lance continued. "He'd been documenting some of their unauthorized activities, trying to understand what they were really doing out there." "And you let him go alone?" "I didn't know how dangerous it had become," Lance said. "God help me, I thought we were dealing with standard research protocol violations. So when Blake said he was going to check out reports of unusual activity near one of the Cherokee markers, I cleared him to investigate." His voice broke on the last words. "The next morning, we found his equipment scattered around the base of an ancient oak tree. No sign of Blake, no indication of what happened to him. Just his gear and a patch of ground that registered electromagnetic readings unlike anything we'd ever seen. I pulled Blake's dog tags out of my pocket, the metal warm from my body heat. Lance's eyes fixed on them immediately. "I've been carrying these for 5 years, I said, wondering what happened to him. And you're telling me you know?" "I know I let him investigate something that should have been left alone," Lance said. "I know Laura's team disappeared 3 days after Blake did, and I know I've been covering it up ever since to protect what's left of the park." Noah cleared his throat. "There's something else you both need to know." We turned to look at him. His face had gone pale, and he was fidgeting with his phone. "I've been helping Laura," he said quietly. "Her team contacted me about 6 months ago, said they needed someone who knew the restricted areas. They told me they were studying the disappearances of some researchers, promised they could explain what happened to the people who got lost." Lance's expression hardened. "Noah?" "I didn't know about the supernatural stuff," Noah said quickly. "I swear I didn't know about any of that until last night. I thought they were just scientists trying to solve missing persons cases. But I've been guiding them to the Cherokee sites, helping them set up equipment, documenting their readings." He pulled out his phone and showed us a folder full of videos and photos. "Laura said they were close to a breakthrough, that they could bring back the people who got lost in what she called temporal displacement zones. She said the missing people weren't dead, just elsewhere." I stared at the phone screen, seeing images of equipment around ancient trees, electromagnetic readings that spiked off the charts, and in one video, what looked like fog that moved in perfect spirals around carved bark. "She told you Blake might still be alive," I said. Noah nodded miserably. "She said all they needed was more data from the source locations, more readings from the marked trees during peak electromagnetic activity." "When?" Lance asked sharply. "Tonight," Noah said. "She's planning something big tonight. Said it was the culmination of years of research." Lance moved to the wall map and started marking coordinates with a red pen. "We need to find them before they make whatever's happening worse." "What if she's right?" I asked. "What if Blake really is just displaced somewhere and we can bring him back?" Lance stopped marking the map and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Kid," he said gently, 5 years ago I thought the same thing. I've been chasing that hope ever since, and all it's done is get more people hurt." He capped the pen and turned back to us. "But you're right about one thing. We need to find Laura's team before more people disappear. And if there's even a chance Blake is still out there somewhere, we owe it to him to try." I folded Blake's dog tags back into my pocket next to Skylar's rules. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was finally going to get answers. "Where do we start?" I asked. Lance grabbed keys from the hook by the door, with the place where it all began, the Cherokee markers near Cataract Falls. The morning sun was finally starting to filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the station floor. The coordinates led us deep into restricted territory, following a maintenance trail that wasn't marked on any tourist maps. Lance drove with the kind of focused intensity that made me think he'd made this trip before, probably more times than he wanted to remember. The Cherokee marked certain trees as sacred sites, Lance explained as we bounced over roots and rocks. Some of them are over 800 years old. The symbols carved into their bark mark burial grounds, ceremonial spaces, places where the spiritual world was supposed to be closest to ours. Noah was sitting in the back seat, scrolling through photos on his phone. Laura's team was particularly interested in the older markings, said they corresponded with geological survey data showing unusual electromagnetic readings. Unusual how? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Off the charts," Noah said, like the trees were broadcasting some kind of signal. We pulled into a small clearing about 50 yards from where I'd encountered Laura the night before, but instead of the basic wildlife monitoring setup she'd shown me, the area now looked like something between a research laboratory and a military command post. Sophisticated equipment was arranged in precise circles around 3 massive oak trees, each one bearing carved Cherokee symbols that looked like they'd been etched into the bark centuries ago. Metal towers with sensor arrays pointed at the trees from multiple angles, cables snaked across the forest floor connecting monitoring stations, and computer screens displayed scrolling data in real time. "This is what wildlife behavior research looks like?" I asked. Lance shut off the engine and grabbed a radio from the dashboard. "Laura's not hiding anymore. She knows we're here." As if summoned by his words, Laura Carson emerged from behind one of the monitoring stations. Gone was the professional but casual scientist I'd met 12 hours ago. This version of Laura looked like someone who'd been living in the woods for weeks. Her hair was pulled back severely. Her field clothes were stained with dirt and something that might have been tree sap, and her eyes had the intense focus of someone absolutely convinced they were on the verge of a breakthrough. "Lance," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I was wondering when you'd finally work up the courage to come out here yourself." "Dr. Carson?" Lance's voice was carefully controlled. "We need to discuss your research activities." Laura laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "My research activities? You mean the work you've been trying to sabotage for 5 years?" She gestured to the equipment surrounding us. "Do you see those readings, Lance? Do you understand what we've accomplished here?" I looked at the nearest monitor. Numbers were scrolling past too fast to follow, but even I could tell they represented some kind of massive electromagnetic activity. "I understand you've been conducting unauthorized experiments on federal land," Lance said. "I understand 3 Rangers are dead because of your work." 3 Rangers are dead because you gave them incomplete information," Laura shot back. "If you'd been honest about what was happening here instead of creating your ridiculous rule system, they might have survived." Noah stepped closer to one of the marked trees, his phone out and recording. "Laura, you told me you were studying the disappearances. You said you were trying to solve them." "I am solving them." Laura's voice took on the tone of someone explaining something to children. "The electromagnetic fields around these trees create temporal distortions. Time moves differently here, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes in loops." She pulled out a tablet and showed us a 3-dimensional graph that looked like a tornado made of numbers. "The fog you've all been so afraid of? It's not weather. It's a visible manifestation of temporal displacement. When time starts moving differently in one area, the atmosphere responds by creating localized pressure changes." Lance was staring at the tablet like it contained his own death sentence. "You're talking about Rule 6. "Rule 6, Laura said mockingly. Stand still if fog rolls in suddenly. Do you know why that rule works, Lance? Because if you move during a temporal distortion, you risk becoming displaced from your own timeline. My mouth went dry. Displaced how? Laura's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked almost sympathetic. Your brother didn't just disappear 5 years ago. He became trapped in a temporal loop around one of these trees. The midnight radio call he responded to? It was his own voice, displaced in time, calling for help. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. Is it? Laura gestured to the monitoring equipment. We've documented 17 separate temporal anomalies in this area over the past 6 years. Each one corresponds with someone going missing near the marked trees. She pulled up another screen showing a timeline with red markers scattered across it. Blake, Ranger Thompson, Ranger Martinez, 4 hikers from Kentucky, a research team from Virginia. All of them encountered temporal distortions while investigating unusual activity near Cherokee sites. Lance's radio crackled, and a voice came through that made all of us freeze. Station 1, this is Blake. I'm near the marked oak, coordinates 35.6284, 83.4419. Something's wrong with the trees. The symbols are glowing. Laura checked her tablet and her eyes went wide. Electromagnetic spike. The temporal field is destabilizing. That's my brother's voice, I whispered. That's your brother's voice from 5 years ago, Laura said grimly. The temporal loop is strengthening. We're running out of time. Lance grabbed my arm as I started toward the nearest marked tree. Rule 4, stay away from trees with carved symbols. But he's calling for help. He's been calling for help for 5 years, Lance said. The question is whether we can answer him without getting trapped ourselves. Laura was frantically adjusting settings on her equipment. The distortion field is expanding. If we don't stabilize it soon, the temporal loop could pull in everything within a quarter-mile radius. Noah lowered his phone, his face pale. Laura, what exactly are you trying to do here? What I should have done 5 years ago, she said. Break the loop. Extract the displaced individuals. Prove that temporal rescue is possible. And if you're wrong? Lance asked. Laura's hands stilled on the controls. If I'm wrong, we'll join them. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Blake's voice. It was laughter, the same hollow, unnatural laughter I'd heard the night before. But now it was coming from multiple directions at once, surrounding us in the clearing. Noah grabbed my arm. Rule 5. Run toward the nearest road if you hear laughter in the woods. But as the laughter grew closer, I realized running might not be an option anymore. The fog was already starting to roll in between the trees. The laughter was getting closer, and that's when I saw them. 4 figures emerged from between the marked trees, moving with the same perfect synchronization as wind-up dolls. They looked like people. 2 men and 2 women in field gear similar to Laura's, but something was fundamentally wrong with the way they moved. Every step happened at exactly the same moment, every turn of their heads perfectly coordinated, like they were all being controlled by the same invisible puppeteer. My research team, Laura whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. The figures stopped about 20 feet away and turned to face us in unison. When they spoke, their voices overlapped in a way that made my skin crawl. Time is circular, they said together, 4 mouths forming the same words at the exact same instant. Beginning is ending is beginning. Lance stepped backward, pulling his radio. This is not normal human behavior. They're displaced, Laura said, frantically checking readings on her tablet. Existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Look at the electromagnetic readings. They're off the charts. I stared at the tablet screen. The numbers were spiking so high they were creating new peaks on the graph every second. The fog was rolling in faster now, Not the gradual mist I'd seen the night before, but thick gray clouds that moved against the wind and seemed to originate from the base of the marked trees themselves. Within seconds, visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet in any direction. "Displacement field expanding," one of the research team members said, but their voice came from 3 different directions at once, like they were standing in multiple locations. "We tried to leave," another voice added, echoing from somewhere behind me, even though all 4 figures were still in front of us. "But leaving requires linear time," the third voice continued from my left. "And linear time doesn't exist here anymore," the fourth voice finished from above, as if someone was speaking from the tree branches. Laura's equipment started beeping frantically. Alarms were going off on multiple monitors, and the electromagnetic readings were climbing into ranges that shouldn't have been possible with any natural phenomenon. "Laura," I said, "what did you do to them?" "I didn't do anything," she protested, but she couldn't look away from her screens. The temporal field was already unstable when we arrived. We were just trying to map it, understand it, figure out how to reverse the displacement. Lance was scanning the fog with his flashlight, but the beam seemed to bend and twist in ways that defied physics. "Rule 6, he muttered. "Stand completely still if fog rolls in suddenly." "The rules won't work now," Laura said grimly. "The temporal distortion is too strong. We're already inside the displacement field." That's when I heard it. Clear as day, cutting through the fog and the overlapping voices of Laura's team. "Tate? Tate, are you out there?" Blake's voice, my brother's voice, calling my name. "Blake!" I shouted back, stepping toward the sound. Lance grabbed my arm immediately. "No, do not move toward that voice." "But it's my brother." "It's your brother from 5 years ago," Lance said firmly. "If you follow that voice, you'll become trapped in the same temporal loop." Laura was typing frantically on her equipment, trying to adjust settings while alarms continued blaring. "I can stabilize the field," she said. "I can extract them safely. I just need more time." "You've had 5 years," Lance said. The synchronized research team took a step closer in perfect unison, their heads tilting at identical angles. 5 years is one moment is eternal, they said together. "Help us remember when we are." Noah had his phone out and was recording everything, his hands shaking but his voice steady. "I'm documenting all of this," he said. "If we don't make it out, at least there will be evidence of what really happened here." Blake's voice came again, closer this time. "Something's wrong with the trees. The symbols are moving." I looked at the nearest marked oak, and Blake was right. The Cherokee symbols carved into the bark were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns like living tattoos crawling across the tree's surface. "The electromagnetic field is rewriting the quantum structure of the wood," Laura said, her voice taking on that lecturing tone even as her world fell apart around her. "The symbols are responding to temporal fluctuations." "Lance," I said, "if Blake is really trapped in there, we have to try to help him." "Kid," Lance's voice was gentle but firm, "sometimes the only way to end a nightmare is to wake up, even if it means losing the dream." He released my arm and walked to the nearest equipment station, where Laura had an emergency axe mounted on the side of a metal case. He picked it up and tested its weight. "What are you doing?" Laura demanded. "Ending this." Lance raised the axe and brought it down on the central processing unit, sparking cables and shattering screens. Laura screamed and lunged toward him, but Noah caught her arms. "You're condemning your brother to permanent exile from linear time?" she shouted at me. "The equipment is the only thing that can bring him back." "The equipment is what's keeping him trapped," Lance said, moving to the next monitoring station and destroying it with methodical efficiency. The electromagnetic readings were going crazy now, spikes and valleys creating patterns that looked almost like heartbeats on the screens that were still functioning. The fog was getting thicker, and the research team's synchronized movements were becoming more erratic. "Beginning is ending," they chanted, but their voices were starting to separate, becoming 4 distinct people again instead of one collective entity. Blake's voice called out one more time, and this time I could hear the desperation in it. "Tate, help me. I don't know how to get home." That broke something inside me. I pulled away from Lance and ran toward Blake's voice, fog swirling around me like cold fingers trying to drag me down. "Tate, no." Lance dropped the axe and tackled me to the ground just as I reached the base of the marked tree where Blake's voice seemed to originate. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but I could hear Lance breathing hard in my ear. "I'm not losing you two." The research team's laughter reached a crescendo, 4 voices harmonizing in a sound that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. But underneath it, I could hear something else. The sound of electronic equipment overloading. Laura's remaining monitors were sparking and smoking, electromagnetic readings climbing into impossible ranges before the screens went white with static. The metal towers were vibrating, cables snapping with sounds like gunshots. "The feedback loop is destabilizing," Laura said, her voice barely audible over the electronic screaming. "The entire system is about to cascade failure." Lance rolled off me and grabbed my hand. "Close your eyes and don't let go." The equipment exploded. I'd never experienced anything like it. Not just sound and light, but something that seemed to tear through reality itself. For a moment that lasted forever, I felt like I was being pulled in 12 different directions while staying perfectly still. Colors that didn't have names flashed behind my closed eyelids, and I heard Blake's voice one last time, very clearly saying, "Thank you." Then silence. When I opened my eyes, the fog was gone. Laura's sophisticated equipment was reduced to scattered pieces of smoking metal and plastic. The research team had vanished completely, as if they'd never existed. Even the artificial pond from the night before was nowhere to be seen, just normal forest floor covered with autumn leaves. The marked trees looked ordinary now, ancient oak trees with old carved symbols that appeared weathered and static, no longer shifting or glowing. Laura sat in the middle of the destruction, staring at the remains of her life's work with the hollow expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. Lance helped me stand up, brushing dirt and debris off my uniform. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the only way to end a temporal loop is to destroy what created it, even if it means losing the people trapped inside forever." Noah lowered his phone, still recording. "Did we just kill them?" "We set them free," Lance said, but his voice carried the weight of someone who'd been making impossible choices for too long. I touched Blake's dog tags in my pocket one last time. They felt different now. Not like a burden I'd been carrying, but like a memory I could finally let rest.